Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. And in this part of the video we will take a closer look at the config server, which is the cornerstone for our microservices architecture. The config server provides centralized configuration management, ensuring consistency and flexibility across all the services in the system. So stay tuned. The user service is no longer needed. Address service no longer needed because it's all being handled under keycloak. I've showed it in the previous two videos what the user is, and the addresses and everything for the user is in keycloak, so we don't need address and we don't need that. This one is redundant because I had issues. These are the front ends. Then the service that we have going is card, checkout, config server, discovery, gateway, notification server, order, payment, and products. Just so we don't get confused. Anyway, we can see all of it in one folder, and that's what I've done. So to keep everything in together, you might want to create it in one folder, but obviously when you do create your repository, you want a repository separately for each one of them, otherwise it's going to be too big for one repository. So you want a separate repository for each one of the service that you have. The first services I'm gonna take a look at is the config service. The config service is the one, is like where all the settings are. You cannot basically the other services relies on it. Yes, so the config server, I wanted to get it to this point. So the config server is the centralized place to manage all the external configuration for the applications, and it allows you to separate the configuration data from the application code, making it easier to update settings without redeploying the services. So this is where all the configurations are for the services. So the databases and all that stuff is all here. So let's take a look at the main application config for the config server is this one, right? So that's the main one, and we've set the port to 888. Now before we go into that, because we are going to go into detail, let's take a look at the dependencies for the config server. So in order to add all these stuff, I've showed it in my in one of my videos on the React application, and there's so many ways to do this. Either you go to springboot.io or spring.io, and then, or personally I use if you want another video of it, we can, but I use this one, Visual Studio Code. That's what I use, and I can add it over there. This one, JetBeans, is not, it's a community version, so you can't do it there, but you could do it with the Visual Studio, right? So you need this dependency. You need Spring Cloud config server. That's for this service. I'm using Labuk to get rid of any unnecessary code that you don't need, to replace all those unnecessary code that you don't need, like the getters and setters. You don't need them. You want your code to look clean. We've got a Spring Boot starter test, so that's when we get to the test bit, and then Postgres, because we've got all the databases here. although this service itself does not need a database, but we got all the databases here. We've got this is a traitor. When you add Spring Boot, when you add one of the services, I think when you add one of the dependencies, you need the attrator anyway. So the attrator is one of the dependencies that you need, and then the open API, the Spring Boot doc, Spring dot open API, and this is just for the open API for all the services, although I have not been able to get this working, but I do have it working for all the other services. So I wanted to configure it so that we can only just get through the gateway, but it is not working. But nonetheless, these are the dependencies that you need. So the main one will be this one, the config server. Then the next one will be the logbook, definitely, and then the database, definitely. Test containers is just for tests. I probably don't need it here, but you could have it there. And then you got the actuator and the rest of it. So that is for the so once you create it, all these are defaults. Okay, that is the dependencies for the config server. The other stuff that you will need to do is, as you create each services, you would have to create the YAML file in here so that it is managed here in one place. Yeah, so it's managed here in one place. So an example will be product, and this is how I have configured product. So we got product database here, configuration, and the rest, but I'll go into it in detail when we go into product. And so I'll explain why we need to rename the YAML file like this when we go into it. But this is the main configuration for the config server, and you in the YAML file, the main YAML file for the config server, you set it up as you got Spring there at the top, and then you've got profiles, you got active, native, and then applications. That application goes under the same line of profiles, which is set up as the name as config server. And then you have another tab which is under the same line to applications, which is cloud config server native search is a dash locations colon class path colon / configurations, and then the server port for me is 8888, and I don't have any conflict with this one. There is another application YAML file you need to set up for this as well, and that is for basically this one. So this is where you set the Eureka details. That is the Eureka server. So we said in here we say Eureka, we say instance host name localhost, client service URL, default zone. This is the Eureka localhost set or should I say website, or yeah. And then you say Spring Boot, and that is on the same level as Eureka there. Spring Cloud config override system properties is false, so do not override system properties. And this is just for the Swagger and API. You don't really need this, and then you don't need it because when we get to the gateway I'll show you what. And then the management, we say management zip keys, tracing, sampling probability is 1.8. yeah, so my suggestion is just to pause this video and just go over this and write all this down. So these are the two application config or application.yaml file you need for the configuration. These lot we'll talk about it later, but those are what you need. So let me see if I can get this one started, get the config server application started. I'm just going to start it. Remember, we've got the backbone, which is the Docker compose file running, so keycloak and all the other services are running, and then we are going to have this running as well. So if you don't get any error, that's all you need for the config server. Nothing more than those two YAML files, and that's it. You are good to go. All right, so at this point we will end this video here, and I hope you enjoy it. We are going to continue looking into the services, and the next one we will look at is the discovery server, Eureka. So see you then. Bye bye.